me. I'm going to talk about the National Institute of Aging, National Institute on Aging in the U.S. So we are part of the NIH, and we are one of the 27 institutes and centers. You'll see us right towards the top left. And, before I go into the NIA, I was just going to mention, in terms of NIH has so many programs. Some of them are open to international investigators. Some of them are limited to investigators in the U.S. So definitely advise going and looking at each one. And in the funding opportunity, it will say what there's actually a section that says eligibility, and you can see what that is. So talking about the National Institute on Aging, we're divided in terms of the funding side into 4 research divisions. Now, separate from the funding side, we also have what we call intramural, which is essentially our labs. So Dr. Luigi Ferrucci runs the intramural part of the NIA, which is, some of the research that we do ourselves. However, the vast majority of our funds is not spent inside the NIA, but rather used to fund investigators. And we do that with 4 divisions. The Division of Aging Biology, I think probably most relevant to a lot of what we're talking about today. A lot of the work on the geroscience hypothesis has been done in the Division of Aging Biology. It really focuses on the basic biology for preventive and interventional strategies to increase resilience and extend healthy aging. Kind of related to that, jumping down to the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology. So that focuses more on geriatrics as well as then looking at clinical. Supporting research on health, disease in older people, and the research in aging over the human lifespan. So some of the talks that we've heard today will also relate to the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology. The second bullet there is the Division of Behavioral and Social Research. So that supports research and research training on the process of aging at both the individual and society levels. Also supports a lot of the digital health type research that we have focused on. And then finally, the Division of Neuroscience supports research to further the understanding of neural and behavioral processes associated with the aging brain. And we also, at the NIA, we are the lead institute for Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of that work will be done by the Division of Neuroscience. So the program that I was specifically going to talk about today is how do we fund companies? How do we work with investors? How do we translate things? So most of the funding that we provide at the NIA is focused on basic and translational research, but more to academic investigators. The program that we're going to talk about today is actually separate, and it's focused on actually funding small biotech. So how do we actually translate the basic research that we funded into small biotechs that can actually commercialize? So we do this through what's called the SBIR and STTR programs. Congress in the US has actually created these programs, and they actually require that each US agency spend a portion of their money on these programs specific to small businesses. So it equates to at the NIA, about $150 million a year that we provide to startups through these programs. So it represents really a major seed fund for the startup community in the aging space. And this is another way of showing you that first slide I showed in terms of all the different institutes and show how NIA fits in. So the advantages of, why would you do an SBIR versus going to a venture investor or something like that? Really, one of the things is we don't see it as why one or the other, but really the stage. So typically we fund companies at the very early stage, sometimes before they've de-risked the technology enough to secure private investment. It is seed funding. It's through grants, so it's completely non-dilutive. It's not a loan. There's no repayment required. There's no impact on shares. Small business retains the intellectual property rights. We found that can be really useful in kind of giving a validation. If something's gone through the NIH peer review process and got funded, it really does validate that technology. And our funding will really support a company to collect the data required to reach the next value inflection point, and that can help attract additional funding, first of all. So the program is structured into different phases. Now, this has no correlation with like the FDA, clinical trials, or anything like that. Most of what we fund is preclinical. So our phase ones, that's really proof of concept. So it could be proof of concept in a mouse as an example. Typically, it's a year in length. It's anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. And really, as I said, meant to establish technical merit. Our phase twos are more development focused, typically 2 years in length, about $2 million. And it's a continuation of the phase one. Or you can actually, if you already have proof of concept data, you could skip the phase one and come to the direct to phase two. If you have some data, but maybe not enough, you can actually do both together in one application with milestones that would allow you to transition from one to another without new application. And that's called the fast track. And then we have 2 later stage awards once you've already had a phase two to really move things towards commercialization. And each of those are over $3 million. So you can see over, a 7-8 year period, this can add up to $9 million. So it's a significant source of funding. So eligibility, you do have to be a U.S. small business. So we have had companies, international companies, that open a U.S. subsidiary. So that's a possibility as well. You have to be 500 or fewer employees, greater than 50% U.S. owned by individuals and independently operated. Or you could be owned by venture capital operating firms, as long as no single venture capital firm owns a majority of your company. So if you're funded by a syndicate of venture capital firms, that is allowed. So in terms of what types of things do we fund through the seed fund, we fund really, all sorts of things. I think much of what we're talking about today would be within our mandate. Anything around aging, around geroscience, around aging biology, age-related diseases, research tools, and Alzheimer's disease. Really looking at development of new therapies for aging related conditions. So it could be sarcopenia, it could be AD, it could be filthy, it could be a lot of the things that we've been talking about. Novel cell, and I mentioned that biomarker diagnostic tools for early detection of disease, as well as we're also interested in any tools to, be a biomarker for aging itself and biological age. So that's something that we've gotten interested in as well. And then the prevention and therapeutics of directly target mechanisms related to aging biology. And on the right is a pie chart. It's just a snapshot in time, but we spent about a third of our money goes to therapeutic development. And then the diagnostics in vitro is about 7%, but then sensors and monitoring is another 18%. Research tools about 9%. So, remember the NIA, we focus on both academic grants on the left, SBIRs on the right. We think about the same types of things, except we look at them in a different lens. So for academic grants, like in L1, with significance, we'll look at what's the chance of a landmark publication, how much knowledge are you adding to the field. But for SBL, for significance, we'll think about how you're changing the paradigm. What's that value proposition? So we have several funding opportunities. If you're interested in applying, you can come talk to us. The main one is the omnibus funding opportunity. That's shown on the left here, both for SBIR and STTR. I don't think I mentioned, but STTR is a sister program. It allows more of the research to be done at the academic institute as opposed to the small business, but the small business is still the applicant. We also have, over the past couple of years, really focused on entrepreneurial training. We really want to bring more entrepreneurs into the aging space. And this is a set of mechanisms that we've designed to do just that. In addition to actually funding the companies, we then have several resources to help those companies achieve success. Several of our webinars are available online, and you can access those. We also have sample applications. So if you're thinking about applying, definitely recommend you look at the sample applications. These are actually successful applications. I think I'll show them in a minute, where these are people that applied and agreed to let their application be used for educational purposes, but these are ones that got top score and got funded. There's also assistance programs in the application, and then several innovator support programs. So we have 2 entrepreneurs in residence on our staff that help work with the companies around business development. I mentioned that we have an applicant assistance program. It's a 10-week program leading up to a due date. And the next deadline is, I think, next week. I mentioned that one of our focuses is bringing in new entrepreneurs into the aging space. One of the ways that we do that is a startup challenge. We started this last year. We actually just passed the second cohort due date, and we're in the process of reviewing those, but we're excited to do a second cohort in 2023. And this shows our challenge prize winners from 2022. One example would be Kristen Glorioso of NeuroAge Therapeutics, which is looking at multi-omics biologic aging clocks in terms of using that to create therapeutics. We also showcase several of our companies once they've been funded. And this just gives an example of some of the companies across devices, diagnostics, therapeutics, and digital health. If you are interested in applying, definitely come talk to us before you apply. We have a one-page specific games that we suggest you send us. And if you send that to us, we can have a call and we can discuss how that fits what we're looking for at the NIA. I mentioned the sample applications. This is just a list of all the ones that are available. If you want to see what the NIH is funding in a certain space, it's actually all available online. You can see a little paragraph abstract. You can see who the investigators are, how much funding they got, what they're doing. So definitely recommend use of the NIH reporter database. If you are going to apply, make sure to start early. It goes through 2 levels of review, peer review, and then council and staff review. And I will stop there. Thank you. Any questions?